The story of the Louisiana Superdome and the New Orleans Saints is inseparable from the soul of New Orleans itself, a city that has always lived between pain and beauty, struggle and celebration. To understand how this stadium became a symbol of hope, it is necessary to return to a period when New Orleans was searching for recognition, dignity, and a place on the national stage. Between the late 1960s and the mid-1970s, football became far more than a sport for the people of Louisiana. It became a promise. During the 1960s, New Orleans, Louisiana, was a city shaped by deep historical inequalities and persistent economic challenges. Despite its global reputation for jazz, culture, cuisine, and resilience, the city often felt overlooked by the rest of the United States. Industrial development lagged behind other major urban centers, unemployment weighed heavily on working-class neighborhoods, and political leaders faced growing pressure to prove that New Orleans could compete with cities like Dallas, Atlanta, and Houston. In this environment, professional football emerged as an unlikely but powerful symbol of hope. To many residents, an NFL franchise would mean visibility, pride, and a declaration that New Orleans mattered. That dream began to take shape on November 1, 1966, when the New Orleans Saints were officially founded. The announcement came after years of lobbying by local leaders and business figures who believed that an NFL team could help transform the city's image. Figures such as Dave Dixon, a key local sports executive, played a crucial role in convincing the league that New Orleans was worthy of a franchise. The timing carried symbolic weight as well. The franchise was announced on All Saints' Day, a fact that inspired the team's name and instantly connected it to the city's strong Catholic heritage. From the beginning, the Saints were more than a football team. They were a reflection of local identity and faith in renewal. However, securing a team was only the first step. New Orleans needed a stadium that could meet NFL standards and project ambition. Early seasons were played at Tulane Stadium, an aging venue that lacked modern amenities and struggled with weather-related challenges. Summer heat, heavy rain, and limited seating underscored a harsh reality. If New Orleans wanted to secure its future in the NFL, it needed a bold and transformative solution. The idea of a massive domed stadium began to circulate among political leaders and urban planners, not only as a sports facility but as a catalyst for economic growth. The push for what would become the Louisiana Superdome gained momentum during the administration of Governor John McKeithen. Serving as governor from 1964 to 1972, McKeithen believed that large-scale infrastructure projects could redefine Louisiana's future. Under his leadership, the state embraced the vision of a domed stadium that would protect fans from the intense Gulf Coast climate while attracting major events beyond football, including conventions, concerts, and national championships. For McKeithen, the project was political, economic, and deeply symbolic. It represented confidence in Louisiana's potential at a time when many doubted it. Construction of the Louisiana Superdome officially began in 1971, a moment that marked a turning point for the city. Rising from the skyline near downtown New Orleans, the structure was ambitious in both scale and cost. It required complex engineering solutions, significant public funding, and the coordination of countless workers, architects, and planners. As steel beams and concrete walls took shape, so did the hopes of a city longing for revival. For residents driving past the construction site, the growing dome became a daily reminder that New Orleans was building something meant to last. The social impact of the project extended beyond sports fans. Thousands of jobs were created during construction, providing income and stability for families across the region. Politically, the Superdome became a symbol of unity, even as debates over public spending and priorities continued. Critics questioned whether the investment was justified, while supporters argued that the long-term benefits would outweigh the costs. In many ways, the Superdome reflected the contradictions of New Orleans itself, bold, controversial, and driven by an unshakable belief in reinvention. After years of anticipation, the Louisiana Superdome was officially inaugurated on August 3, 1975. The opening was more than a ceremonial event. It was a declaration. For the first time, New Orleans possessed a stadium that matched the grandeur of its culture and aspirations. The massive roof, innovative design, and sheer scale of the building captured national attention. To Saints fans who had endured losing seasons and skepticism from outsiders, the Superdome represented a fresh beginning. It was concrete and steel, yes, but it was also emotion, faith, and expectation. The opening of the Superdome signaled the dawn of a new era. It promised that New Orleans could host the biggest events in American sports and entertainment, and that the Saints finally had a home worthy of their ambitions. More importantly, it gave the city a powerful symbol of resilience and hope. In a place so often tested by history, the Superdome stood as proof that New Orleans could dream boldly and build something extraordinary. For the fans who filled its seats believing that victories would come, the stadium was not just a venue. It was a promise that better days were possible, and that a city long defined by struggle was ready to rise. From the moment the Louisiana Superdome opened its doors in August 1975, it stood as one of the most imposing and modern arenas in all of American sports. Rising above downtown New Orleans, it looked like a promise fulfilled, a monument to ambition and belief. Yet, for the New Orleans Saints and their loyal fans, the decades that followed would transform this architectural marvel into a stage of emotional contradictions, where hope and heartbreak coexisted under the same massive roof. The late 1970s marked the beginning of a difficult chapter. While the Superdome dazzled visitors with its size and innovation, the Saints struggled to find success on the field. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Inside one of the most advanced stadiums in the NFL, the team repeatedly fell short. Seasons ended with losing records, and expectations were crushed year after year. National media quickly labeled the Saints as one of the league's most cursed franchises, a team that seemed unable to escape failure no matter how passionate its fan base remained. One of the most emblematic figures of this era was quarterback Archie Manning. Drafted by the Saints in 1971, before the Superdome even existed, Manning became the face of the franchise throughout the 1970s. Playing his home games in the Superdome after its opening, he displayed undeniable talent, intelligence, and toughness. Despite his efforts, victories were rare. Manning was sacked relentlessly behind weak offensive lines and often forced to carry a team that lacked depth and consistency. Night after night, inside a packed Superdome, fans watched their quarterback fight valiantly, only to walk off the field defeated. His story became symbolic of the Saints themselves, gifted, resilient, but constantly overwhelmed. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Superdome developed a strange emotional atmosphere. It was frequently full, loud, and alive before kickoff. Fans arrived believing that this time would be different. Yet, as losses accumulated, the noise often faded into silence by the final whistle. The stadium that had been built as a beacon of progress slowly absorbed the collective disappointment of a city that desperately wanted something to celebrate. Sundays became rituals of hope, followed by familiar pain. The Saints' reputation across the NFL worsened during these years. They endured seasons with double-digit losses and became the subject of jokes and skepticism. Even as the Superdome hosted major events, concerts, and college championships, Saints fans felt trapped in a cycle of frustration. The building that was meant to elevate the franchise instead seemed to magnify every failure. Each defeat echoed louder beneath the dome, reinforcing the belief that the team was burdened by something heavier than bad luck. Still, the bond between the city and the team never broke. New Orleans continued to show up. The Superdome remained a place of loyalty, even when success felt unreachable. This unwavering support made the pain deeper, but also more meaningful. Fans were not merely watching football, they were investing emotion, identity, and pride into a team that reflected their own struggles as a city often underestimated and overlooked. A turning point finally came in 1987. After more than 2 decades of existence, the New Orleans Saints reached the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. Under head coach Jim Mora, the team finished the regular season with a winning record, something many fans had once believed would never happen. When the Saints took the field in the postseason, the Superdome transformed. For the first time, the building felt lighter, as if decades of frustration had briefly lifted. Although the playoff run ended in disappointment, that moment mattered deeply. It proved that the Saints were capable of change, even if sustained success remained elusive. Despite that milestone, the years that followed were inconsistent. The Saints oscillated between brief moments of optimism and long stretches of mediocrity. The Superdome continued to witness painful defeats, coaching changes, and missed opportunities. By the early 2000s, the emotional weight of the stadium was undeniable. It had seen generations of fans grow older still waiting for a championship-level team. The promise that once defined its construction felt delayed, almost forgotten. By 2005, as the city of New Orleans faced one of the greatest tragedies in its history, the Superdome stood not only as a sports venue, but as a silent witness to decades of unfulfilled dreams. From 1975 to 2005, it had been a place where hope was born repeatedly, only to be tested and often extinguished. Yet even in its darkest moments, the Superdome never lost its meaning. It carried the emotional history of a franchise and a city that refused to give up. Beneath its vast ceiling, heartbreak became part of the identity, setting the stage for a future redemption that, though unseen at the time, was slowly approaching. By August 2005, the Louisiana Superdome was no longer just a stadium. It was a landmark woven into the emotional fabric of New Orleans, carrying decades of memories, frustrations, and fragile hopes. When Hurricane Katrina approached the Gulf Coast at the end of that summer, no one could imagine how deeply the Superdome would be transformed, not by football, but by human suffering and survival. Hurricane Katrina made landfall on August 29, 2005, unleashing catastrophic winds, rain, and storm surge that overwhelmed the levee system protecting New Orleans. Neighborhoods across the city were flooded, homes were destroyed, and thousands of residents were forced to flee with little more than the clothes they were wearing. In the midst of chaos and fear, the Superdome became an emergency refuge. What had once echoed with cheers and heartbreaks now filled with the sounds of desperation, crying children, and exhausted families seeking safety. More than 30,000 people crowded into the Superdome in those days. Inside, conditions quickly deteriorated. Power failures plunged the stadium into darkness. The roof was damaged, rainwater leaked inside, and basic resources such as food, clean water, and medical care became scarce. Images broadcast around the world showed the massive structure surrounded by floodwaters, helicopters circling overhead, and people packed tightly together beneath the dome. The Superdome became a global symbol, representing both the resilience of those who survived and the deep trauma inflicted on the city. For many residents of New Orleans, those days left scars that would never fully heal. The Superdome, once associated with hope for sporting glory, now carried the weight of collective pain. It stood as a reminder of loss, displacement, and the failures that allowed a natural disaster to become a human catastrophe. Even after evacuees were relocated and the city slowly began to recover, the emotional imprint of Katrina lingered heavily within the walls of the stadium. In the months that followed, New Orleans faced an uncertain future. Entire communities were shattered, population numbers dropped dramatically, and questions arose about whether the city could ever truly recover. The Saints themselves were displaced, forced to play their home games during the 2005 season in cities like San Antonio, Texas, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The Superdome remained closed, damaged, and silent, much like the city it belonged to. Yet, out of devastation came the slow and painful process of rebuilding. By 2006, efforts to restore the Superdome were underway, not just as a sports venue, but as a symbol of rebirth. The return of the Saints became intertwined with the emotional recovery of New Orleans. That same year marked a new chapter for the franchise. Sean Payton was hired as head coach, bringing a fresh vision and renewed discipline. Even more importantly, quarterback Drew Brees arrived in New Orleans after leaving the San Diego Chargers, carrying doubts about his injured shoulder, but also an unshakable belief in redemption. By subscribing, you are joining a community that values storytelling over statistics and memory over momentary hype. You are choosing to dive into narratives that reveal how a single stadium can become a symbol of resilience, how a season can define a generation, and how hope can rise again even after the most crushing disappointment. These are stories that linger long after the final whistle, stories that connect fans across time and place, and stories that deserve to be told with depth and honesty. So don't just watch from the sidelines. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay with us as we continue uncovering the hidden, emotional, and sometimes unsettling stories behind the greatest arenas in the NFL. Here, every stadium has a soul, shaped by the people who filled it, the moments that defined it, and the struggles that tested it. And while some of these souls found moments of peace and redemption, others remain restless, forever echoing with unanswered dreams and unfinished stories. If you want to understand football in its most human form, this is your place. The reopening of the Superdome in September 2006 was not merely a football event. It was a moment of collective healing. On September 25, 2006, the Saints hosted the Atlanta Falcons in the first game back inside the stadium since Katrina. The atmosphere that night was unlike anything the Superdome had ever witnessed. Fans filled the seats not just to watch a game, but to reclaim a piece of their identity. Many had lost homes, loved ones, and years of their lives, yet they stood together, united by something familiar and powerful. When Steve Gleason blocked a punt early in that game, the roar that erupted inside the Superdome felt almost spiritual. It was as if the building itself exhaled years of pain in a single moment of release. That play became instantly iconic, symbolizing defiance, resilience, and the refusal of a city to remain broken. The Saints went on to win the game, but the result mattered less than what it represented. New Orleans had found its voice again. From 2005 to 2006, the Superdome evolved from refuge to scar, and finally to symbol of rebirth. It carried the memory of suffering while embracing the possibility of renewal. The return of the Saints, led by Sean Payton and Drew Brees, did not erase the trauma of Hurricane Katrina, but it offered something equally powerful: hope rooted in perseverance. That night against the Falcons marked the beginning of a new emotional era, not only for the franchise, but for an entire city determined to rise again. By the end of the 2009 season, the Louisiana Superdome had already lived many lives. It had been a monument to ambition, a witness to decades of frustration, a shelter during catastrophe, and a scar etched into the memory of an entire city. Yet nothing could compare to what unfolded as New Orleans moved toward the greatest triumph in its sporting history. For the Saints and their fans, the road from pain to glory was finally reaching its summit. And once again, the Superdome stood at the center of it all. The 2009 season felt different from the very beginning. Under head coach Sean Payton, quarterback Drew Brees had grown into a leader whose connection with the city ran deeper than football. Brees, who had arrived in 2006 carrying doubts about his injured shoulder, now carried the weight of New Orleans' hopes with calm determination. Week after week, the Saints dominated opponents with an explosive offense and a renewed sense of belief. Inside the Superdome, the atmosphere became electric. What once had been cautious optimism transformed into genuine confidence. Fans no longer came merely to hope. They came expecting greatness. That season culminated on February 7, 2010, at Super Bowl XLIV, played at Sun Life Stadium in Miami Gardens, Florida. Facing the Indianapolis Colts, led by Peyton Manning, the Saints carried not just a game plan, but the emotional history of a city that had endured more than most. When the final whistle blew and New Orleans emerged victorious, the meaning of that championship transcended sports. Drew Brees was named Super Bowl MVP. Tears streamed down faces across Louisiana, and the Lombardi Trophy became a symbol of redemption. Back in New Orleans, the Superdome erupted in celebration. The building that had once echoed with silence after defeat now vibrated with joy, pride, and vindication. The impossible had finally become real. For a moment, it felt as though the Superdome had been cleansed of its past burdens. The Saints were no longer defined by heartbreak. They were champions. Parades filled the streets of New Orleans, and the city embraced its team as a reflection of its own resilience. The Superdome was no longer just where the Saints played. It was the heart of a shared victory that belonged to everyone who had endured the long journey. Yet, as history had taught New Orleans time and again, glory never comes without cost. In the years that followed the Super Bowl triumph, the Saints remained competitive, often dominant, but the postseason brought a new kind of pain. Playoff eliminations arrived suddenly and cruelly, each one reopening emotional wounds fans thought had healed. Seasons filled with promise ended abruptly, reminding everyone that sustained success in the NFL is as fragile as it is rare. One of the most painful chapters unfolded during the 2018 season, which concluded with the NFC Championship game played on January 20, 2019, against the Los Angeles Rams. Inside the Superdome, the stakes were enormous. A trip to the Super Bowl was within reach, and the city could almost taste another moment of destiny. Then came the play that would be etched into NFL history. A blatant pass interference went uncalled by the referees late in the game, a decision that stunned players, coaches, and fans alike. The Saints eventually lost in overtime, but the sense of injustice lingered far beyond the final score. That night, the Superdome became a place of disbelief and anger. The roar of the crowd turned into stunned silence, followed by outrage. National debates erupted over officiating. Rule changes were proposed, and the phrase, "what could have been," haunted New Orleans once again. For many fans, that loss felt heavier than ordinary defeat. It felt like something had been taken away, unfairly and irreversibly. As the seasons continued, the Saints remained contenders, but time began to assert itself. Drew Brees, whose career had become inseparable from the identity of the franchise, faced mounting injuries and physical limitations. Each home game at the Superdome carried an unspoken awareness that an era was nearing its end. When Brees officially retired in 2021, it marked the closing of one of the most meaningful chapters in both Saints history and the story of the stadium itself. His departure left a void not only at quarterback, but in the emotional center of the franchise. That same year, the Superdome entered a new phase of its existence. In 2021, following extensive renovations and modernization efforts, the stadium was officially renamed the Caesars Superdome. New technology, updated facilities, and a refreshed appearance prepared it for the future. Yet, beneath the upgrades and new name, the soul of the building remained unchanged. It still carried decades of memory, triumph, pain, and perseverance. Today, season after season, the Caesars Superdome continues to be the place where hope and frustration collide. Fans still fill its seats believing that another great chapter can be written. At the same time, they carry the knowledge that dreams inside this arena often demand a price. The echoes of Super Bowl glory coexist with the silence of playoff heartbreaks. Cheers mingle with sighs. Faith battles fear. The Superdome has never promised certainty. Instead, it has offered something far more human, the experience of believing, losing, rising, and believing again. From the heights of Super Bowl XLIV to the sting of controversial calls and the farewell of legendary figures like Drew Brees, the stadium remains a living witness to the emotional journey of New Orleans. Modernized, renamed, and still standing tall, it continues to be the stage where the city confronts its past and dares to imagine its future. In the Caesars Superdome, the dream is always alive, but it never comes without sacrifice. If you truly believe that football is about much more than the final score on the scoreboard, if you understand that some stadiums are not just structures of concrete and steel, but living witnesses to decades of faith, pain, triumph, and heartbreaking disappointment, then you are exactly where you belong. This channel was created for those who feel the roar of the crowd even in moments of silence, for those who know that places like the Caesars Superdome in New Orleans are more than arenas. They are chapters of history written with human emotion. From legendary cities, iconic franchises, unforgettable games, and controversial decisions, to moments that changed lives and reshaped entire communities, we dive deep into the true stories hidden behind the bright lights of the NFL.
We talk about the players who carried the hopes of millions, the coaches who defined eras, and the dates and events that still echo through these stadium walls long after the crowds have gone home. These are stories of belief that turned into celebration, and sometimes into frustration so heavy it still lingers in the air.
So if you want to keep exploring the emotional side of football, uncovering the untold narratives, the dramatic twists, and the darker chapters that most people never talk about, don't miss what comes next. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the notification bell, and walk with us through the hidden corridors of the NFL's greatest arenas. Here, every stadium has a soul, every game leaves a scar or a miracle behind, and not every story ends in peace.